Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome you to our session on the power of the arts for the people's well-being. My name is Harald Hartung. I'm the head of unit in charge of fair societies and cultural heritage at the Directorate General for Research and Innovation at the European Commission. Our session today will lead us to learn and discover to which great extent the arts contribute to people's well-being across European societies. With the Horizon Europe Research Programme, we make advance the digital and green transition for a more fair and equal society and for sustainable development. But let's not forget that this transformation in the European society is not only a socio-economic transition, it is also a cultural transition. Research in social sciences and humanities brings us more knowledge and understanding of these demanding, complex, and rapid transitions in our societies. The present transition influences all areas of our lives, from how we live and love, how we move, how we eat, how we consume, to how we connect with each other. This transition implies deep changes in people's thinking and behavior, as well changes in societies and their structure. Our lives are not only based on facts and figures. There is much more to it. The arts are the strongest vehicle to bring new elements like imagination, intuition, and free association into the rational process of thinking. They lead us to think out of the box and to be inspired to create and to innovate, as well as to communicate with each other differently, yet humanly. When we engage with the arts, we often experience positive outcomes for our well-being and mental health. New and exciting scientific discoveries that combine knowledge from multiple disciplines have concrete beneficial effects on our well-being and health, especially on our mental health. They are widely accessible, cost-effective, and non-pharmaceutical. Before giving the floor to our distinguished speakers, I invite you to make your voices heard by sharing your insights, knowledge, and experiences on the arising strong interest in the arts and well-being. For this purpose, please use the Slido. With the Slido questions and answers, you can share your ideas about the topic of the session with the European Commission. Our team will take a careful look at your replies, and we will take your comments and experience into account for further developing our policy in the area of arts and well-being. In a nutshell, with the arts, nobody is left behind. Now it's the time to give the floor to our distinguished moderator, Ms. Laura Arpiainen, Professor of Health and Wellbeing Architecture from Aalto University. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Harald, and a very warm welcome to all on my behalf as well. My name is Laura Arpiainen, and I work as a professor of health and wellbeing architecture at Aalto University in Helsinki, Finland. It is my distinct pleasure to moderate our discussion today. My interface to arts and well-being stems from architecture, which interestingly, in my language, is also called construction art. I'm very interested in how the built environment, and obviously any public and private art therein, affects our well-being. I also want to note that my definition of art is that art communicates to us things that cannot be communicated by any other means. So art has a special place in my heart because I know that there is a way that art affects me that nothing else can do. I also wanted to say how happy I am that this session centers on well-being and not just health. Many of us live with conditions that might label us not healthy or not fully healthy, but everybody's well-being can be improved, even if we're lying in a hospital bed or a care home. The reach of well-being can be immense. We, for example, recently did a project on environments for people with memory decline, and the importance of including art in that environment was really pronounced. At this point, after my brief introductory words, I would like to introduce our distinguished speakers today. And I will start in Vienna, where we have Matthew Pawlowski, who is an assistant professor of cognitive and neuroaesthetics in the Faculty of Psychology at the University of Vienna. He is currently the coordinator of the European Union Horizon 2020 program, ARTIS, focusing on societal challenges and the arts. Raritas Branca is program director at the Cluj Cultural Center in Romania. She coordinated the Arts and Wellbeing project, co-financed by the Creative Europe program of the European Union, and is part of the team on the CultureForHealth project, an European Union preparatory action dedicated to culture and well-being. And last but not least, Niels Fietsche is a technical officer at WHO Europe, where he works in the Behavioral and Cultural Insights Unit with a focus on culture and health. And Niels is in Copenhagen. With this much expertise around the virtual table, I am sure that we are going to have a wonderful session. And before I start, I would like to remind you, dear audience, to please use the Slido Q&A to share with the European Commission your insights, knowledge, and experiences. All responses will be read by the European Union staff. And at this point, we are ready for our first discussion question, which is, what do the arts and well-being mean for you? What elements should be taken into account so that artistic creation can be put to the service of people's well-being? And what must we not forget when we design policy in this field? And I would invite Matthew to be our first responder.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to say I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to have a chance to talk about what I think is an extremely important topic, and I'm happy to see so much interest in this topic. As Laura said, I'm coming to this with the perspective of a researcher, and especially a psychologist. So our work is to primarily understand how art can impact people at an individual level. How does art impact our actions, our perceptions? How does an engagement with art make us feel, think, and especially understand ourselves? And a lot of the work that we do is to investigate art encounters in ecologically valid settings. So for example, in museums, in galleries, and increasingly how we engage art in our everyday lives, in our urban environments, or even in our homes. And as mentioned, I'm also the coordinator of a Horizon 2020 project, where we have a mandate to look at this transformative potential of art, and especially to look at questions such as, can we use art to change minds about climate change? Can art bring us together as communities? And when I think about what art and well-being mean to me, and what I hope to advocate for in the session today, is that we both look at this ability of art to make us feel better. Can it reduce our stress, our anxiety, our mood, which I should mention we also do investigate, but also to make us, quote unquote, better people, or I might say different people. Can we use art to actively change minds and behaviors? And just to jump to the conclusion, I would say, yes, I think we can. And then collectively, we can start looking at how this impact of art at the individual level can then be combined to talk about how it impacts our societies. And finally, I think it's this expansive definition of what arts and well-being means that really opens a range of applications. It connects the work in research and interest in policy to a lot of the work that is actually being done by artists and museums, and also to the understanding of the public. I think the public has an intuitive idea that the arts can be extremely powerful, but hopefully today we can start to talk about how we can really open up this full range of applications. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Niels. Thank you, Matthew. And our next speaker will be Rarita from Romania.
Thank you, Laura. I'm also very privileged to be here with you in this conversation. As you already mentioned, I am speaking as a cultural practitioner and newly as a researcher with a particular interest on the impact of culture on social transformation and urban development. And during the past 6 years, within the Inner Space program of the Cluj Cultural Center, my organization in Romania, we have been exploring the relation between culture and well-being through pilot artistic intervention, research, and advocacy. And we are also organizing an annual conference, which, by the way, we are all I would like to invite you all to attend. It is in 1 month in Cluj. I'm also part of the team of a new scoping review on the impact of culture on health and well-being within the CultureForHealth program, as you have just mentioned. And in our work, we are focusing on the potential of the arts to catalyze well-being by contributing to both mental and physical health and also welfare. But we are also focusing mostly on what supports people have life satisfaction. And we are looking at well-being at 3 levels: the level of individuals, of organizations, and of communities. For us, well-being is about thriving, about enabling people to achieve their own definition of success. And from that perspective, I'm particularly interested in those dimensions of art and well-being that are connected to the intrinsic value of culture, such as art's capacity to create meaning and sense of purpose in life. As you can know, art can enrich people at the level of knowledge, emotion, create social connection and bonding. But I think more importantly, it can stimulate reflection and imagination about possible future and create aesthetic engagement that informs our value system, which is important for how we as individuals develop a sense of meaning in life.
Thank you, Rarita. Very profound goals you have. And now over to Niels, who will respond from the angle of health policy development.
Thank you, Laura, and let me join the chorus of excuse me, thank yous, and also thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. So I approach the question of arts and well-being from the perspective of health policy here at WHO. Specifically, I work with local, regional, and national policymakers in a number of WHO European member states, where we're exploring the potential benefits that arts interventions can have in relation to health and well-being. And I'd like to spend a couple of minutes here separating out some things that have been said. So I think generally we talk about arts and health interventions as things that happen either passively or actively. We can passively go to a museum and or read a book or watch a play and feel the power of that and feel the effect that it has on our body. But there are also specifically designed arts interventions that can have health and well-being effects, and that's really where WHO is particularly interested in at the moment. So, for instance, while there is good evidence to show that passive participation in going to museums, for instance, can have a positive health effects, we're very interested to see how specifically designed museum tours that are designed for Alzheimer patients, for instance, can help improve the well-being and can positively impact on the symptoms of those suffering from Alzheimer's. Now, one specific point that I'd like to make here is something that we really have to be careful of, and I'm passionate about this, is not to come across as instrumentalizing art. Art and the artistic quality that is engaged in an intervention is really, as I think Daisy Fancourt, one of the top researchers in this field, is beginning to show, is that the active ingredient in this whole world is the quality, is one of the active ingredients is the quality of the artistic intervention. So it's really not a question of incidentally using art on the side in order to have a health effect. It's really using art to its full potential, using artists of high quality to create high quality artistic interventions in order to have a positive health effect. I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you. Back to you, Laura.
Thank you so much, Niels. I think we all have more to say on this topic than what our time allows. But let me just briefly summarize that. Matthew, I really admire your work because the societal transformation aspect is so close to my own heart. And you mentioned climate change. We've actually had a summer intensive here where we had art students and architecture students make interventions that would also have a climate change mitigation or adaptation aspect. So we really see art as a powerful tool. And Rita, you have been delivering results on a societal scale for several years now. I think your project has been going on 6 years, I think. And thank you for mentioning your annual event, because the continuity of these processes is also very valuable. The community building aspect, also bravo to Romania. And Niels, I'm really interested in hearing your comments on the qualitative aspects that are important as success factors in the policy development. And surely as a planner myself, I see the value of careful planning and really designing these interventions as projects specifically to the intended recipient group, and also bringing in this multi-sectoral group of users to work together to bring these experiences to improve people's well-being. So thank you. That is a great start for our conversation. I'm going to move directly to our second question, which is, what is the newest of the new in this policy field of arts and well-being? When you implemented your projects, was there something surprising that came up, any unexpected results? Did you find any directly scalable and replicable results that could be used as developing best practices? And what are the challenges that you've encountered when measuring well-being, which is always a bit of a undefined question. How do you define well-being? And I would invite Rita to start responding to this question.
Thank you, Laura. This is a really complex question, so I will try to give my take on this. First of all, I think it's worth mentioning that the benefits of art in terms of well-being are not new. It's rather that the urgency of the topics of emotional and mental health creates now a new context and interest in this potential. And I also think that we are now at this point where there has been a huge amount of interesting experimental projects, pilot projects across Europe that showed incredible rich evidence. And then we also, as Niels already mentioned, there's also a rich body of scientific evidence. And I think the time is now for us to focus on scaling up successful pilot projects and to use this experience to produce systemic solutions that are needed now for systemic challenges, actually. And maybe my key point here is that art can be part of systemic solutions to global challenges, such as increased mental health problems, an aging population, and social inequalities. And I would like to just give some of the examples of how this happens. As I previously mentioned, we are looking at this three-dimensional individual, organizational, and community well-being. And at the level of individuals, during the pandemic, in the first months of the lockdown, we have carried out a survey across Europe, asking people how they engage with art and curious to see if that had an impact on their well-being. And it turns out that actively engaging with creative activities during the pandemic helped people cope with their feelings and develop innovative strategies to deal with uncertainty. And actually, engaging with creative activities was the favorite leisure time occupation during the pandemic. And this shows that there is an important potential in using the arts to develop resilience and tackle the mental health aspects of crises, such as climate change and war. Then I would also like to share our experience on how arts can support organizational well-being. Again, during the pandemic, when we all know that the rates of burnout among employees has started to grow, we have had a cultural intervention that supported people with burnout to decrease significantly their burnout rates and improve their well-being, and most of all, equip them with new strategies to deal with the everyday stress. And this can have really important takeaways for policy development. And at community level, I would just like to mention that more recently, more and more art centers, museums, archives, community centers are being used as both places for cultural participation, but also as access points for social and health services, especially for people that are underserved.
Thank you, Rarita. It's really great to hear these examples of like real life. And I think we can all relate to some of the issues that happened during the pandemic. So over to Niels now to respond again from a policy development side.
Thanks, Laura. And I couldn't agree more with Rarita about the importance of implementing at scale. In fact, I think that's probably going to be my first point. Undoubtedly, there is a huge amount of work to be done, and it's still left to do in terms of providing evidence and further research about how arts and health works, how arts impact on well-being, and so forth. But I think there are a number of interventions, a number of points now where the evidence is so good that I think we can start to move the dial and actually start focusing on implementation. And at WHO, working together with colleagues in Denmark and Romania, including Rarita, we're, for instance, looking at implementing we are currently implementing an intervention that was started in the UK, helping mothers with postpartum depression through singing groups, and seeing how those transfer into other cultural contexts. So this question of implementation is, I think, a really burning one. The other thing that I would say really is the importance of multi-sectoral collaboration. It's something that we talk about so much in policy circles, but generally when sectors collaborate, they tend to be the education sector with the culture sector, or the health sector with the social sector. But what you don't tend to get, was very rare in fact, is arts and culture sectors collaborating with health and social care sectors. And this is really kind of a fundamentally new space, and we have to learn to do that better. We have to forge new relationships. And I think this is where the magic, as it were, is going to happen on a policy level. And then I think finally, and this is perhaps something specifically for institutions like my own, for WHO, it's important to start developing some guidance. I think member states that I'm in touch with are frequently asking me, what's next? How do we start? What are the things that we need to do? And I think for those questions, we need to start preparing some guidance about which interventions work, how they're implemented, and how perhaps in the wider health systems things need to change in order to integrate social prescribing, for instance, and other tools or mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niels. There was some really good practical thoughts there. And now over to Matthew. I think you also may have something to say about the mechanisms of how this can be a real success.
Yes, thank you. I think I'm going to take the perspective of advocating for research. First of all, I agree with the others. There is definitive evidence that art can make an important impact on people's lives. And I would point, for example, to the scoping review commissioned by the WHO on mental health. However, I still think there is much to be done, both in basic research and, as was already mentioned, in application. And first, we still need more data. And I would point especially to the need for controlled one-dose studies. So we have very good evidence on what happens when we install art in an environment, say a hospital, an office. But what we still need specific answers to is what happens when you put one person in front of one work of art, or say, bring them to a museum for one visit. And how does that impact, or does it impact specific outcomes? And I think this is true both at the level of health, but also at the level of especially how it impacts our attitudes and our behaviors. And it's this sort of understanding that I think would really open up the field even more for really innovative, creative applications. When we talk about understanding, as already mentioned, we also need to move past the if to the why, the when, and the how. So it is becoming clear that art for well-being is not a one-size-fits-all proposition. It works sometimes for some people in some cases. And we need to start thinking, as Niels already mentioned, of active ingredients. What aspects are necessary to maximize the chances of a particular outcome, and why? And also mechanisms for action. How do outcomes come about? When we move then to the application discussion, we need to think more expansively about what it means to have access. We need to move away from this idea that just simply bringing someone into the context of art or bringing art to someone will be enough. But we need to think of the full chain of how art is embedded in our lives as opportunities for mediation. And we can think about what kinds of cultural scaffolding might be important during an experience, what kinds of continuing care. And I think this is a really amazing opportunity for policy to bring together stakeholders at different levels. This also connects to research funding. If we want answers for these questions, we need to put resources to actually investigating this. And I'll just end with some exciting findings. In the work we're doing, we do find that despite the issues I mentioned, this still does work. If you put one person in front of one work of art, or send them, say, to Google Arts and Cultures, it does have an impact both on their attitudes and on how they feel. And this also works at the level of 1 to a few seconds, or not seconds, excuse me, minutes, which I think opens up the possibility for a discussion of microdosing or really embedding art in people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Many really action-oriented suggestions there already. I also wanted to comment on Rita's insights, and we also find in architecture, looking at the built environment, that the results that are most evident for us have to do with mental and emotional well-being of being in a space or being in a city, for that matter, because we look at small scale and also large scale situations. And Niels, the call to move the dial is really, I think, what we should take away from this meeting today, is that let's move up and let's do more of this. And we have lots of people from around Europe listening today. So please give us your feedback on Slido on how you see these things possibly working in your own communities. And Matthew, obviously the guidance and research part are something that we see as a university here as a big role for any professional leading this work. And also on a personal note, I think the role of leadership in any multi-sectoral undertaking is crucial. And I think just having us here today shows that we're really working in an area that is at the real center of effect of how we can really move well-being forward. So as I mentioned, I would like to remind you about the Slido. The Q&A is there for you to share with the European Commission all your insights, knowledge, and experiences. So please use it, and all your responses will be read. With this, I am moving to our third question, which is, which are the game changers to have an impact in people's well-being thanks to arts? Which are the game changers that we need now? What are the merits of the culture and well-being for all generations? And where does all this start? What's the role of education and STEAM for in this European Year of the Youth? Thank you. And maybe Niels, if you could start us off with this question.
Sure, thank you, Laura. So I think, ironically, one of the big game changers is actually coming around to the original definition, for us at least at WHO, coming around to the original definition of what we think of as health. And maybe just to remind our audience, in case you don't know, so WHO in the 1940s defined health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. Now, for many decades, advances in health have been primarily concerned with biomedical health, but research on social, commercial, environmental determinants of health, as well as cultural context of health over the last 2 decades has really demonstrated how the degree of health is impacted by non-biomedical factors. And I think this has really been a game changer, opening up to the policymakers' attention to things like arts and health. So that even though our instinct when it comes to health might still be to look for a pill or an injection, it's become really clear that many of the complex health challenges we're facing, like obesity, for instance, require multimodal interventions that target both the biomedical health and sociocultural well-being of the patient. And I think this really is where arts and health sits. They're creative solutions for complex challenges. Now, I'm not an expert on education, so I can't really say a lot about that. But what I'd like to point to in terms of education is that it's worth noting, even from the report that we published on the evidence supporting arts and health in medical education, it's worth noting that humanities education has helped improve, for instance, doctors' empathy, their ability to communicate, and so forth. So I think, more widely speaking, I imagine there's just as much of a potential for impact for humanities education in STEM, or as we're now calling it, STEAM education for the young. So I imagine that very much applies in that arena as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niels. And over to Matthew on the same question. Which are the game changers?
Yeah, I think a major game changer, and I would say that this is slowly happening, but it could be accelerated, is we need a complete reframing of the role of arts in public. And by this, I mean we need to move from the purpose of art, especially from a public resources, a museums, a public spaces perspective, as a collection of culture that is somehow intrinsically important or good for us, to that of a resource that is collected and made available for a wide range of public needs, which can be both highly personal and also open-ended. So art might make you feel better, it might give you something to think about, it might challenge you, it might just be a good way to spend a lunch break. I think it's the former perspective, that art is somehow intrinsically important for us and we should appreciate it, that leads to much of the disengagement and distrust among the public. So people think art is not for them, or they think there's only one correct way to respond to art, or that they need some sort of special training to really appreciate it. And then I think this is what sometimes translates to some of the mistrust of funding. Why should we support the arts if it's not for me? On the other hand, if the general point of art in museums was as a collection of experiences that might have very different impacts for different people, and if the point of making it available was to allow for these personal journeys, I think this would naturally unlock a much more active use of the arts at all levels. And I would just note that this is happening. For example, in 2005, the International Council of Museums, or ICOM, changed its definition of a museum from something focused on objects to something focused on the services of society and development. And I think that there's amazing opportunities at all levels for this to be supported by policy. We might start thinking about how are museums communicating to the public? How are municipalities advertising their institutions and the role of institutions in cities? And how are we embedding art visits in everyday life? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Again, great points. And now to Rarita on the same question.
Thank you. Well, I would continue a bit on Matthew's point about art, and I would say that I think it's also important, as much as I am passionate about, for instance, also specific interventions of art to support well-being and health. I think it's really important to also have in mind that the cultural sector as such and the arts, they don't necessarily need to serve this purpose. So there is space enough for enriching the practices of museums and of artists and of cultural organizations without having to propose this as a new standard, let's say. I need to advocate for the freedom of expression. And again, when we are speaking about game changers, maybe from a broader perspective, I see a huge potential for culture to support a change of paradigm in our society, from focusing on just treating existing disease and existing social problems to actually a shift to a society that and economy of well-being. So we are kind of supporting individuals, communities, and organizations to be healthy, so that we have a society of well-being. And as you mentioned, the European Year of Youth, I would like to point that enabling access to culture is, for me, the game changer. And how this has to happen, it has to happen in partnership with different sectors, as Niels also has mentioned. But I think we have to enable access to culture from an early age, and because that supports healthy behaviors in young people. And this can happen by microdosing in schools. I can see how this easily can become a large-scale intervention, that classes and maybe the school day starts with just 5 minutes of singing, which we know from evidence that supports young people to learn how to breathe correctly, to have a better physical posture, but also support their emotional and mental well-being, and also social connectivity. So I think also bringing STEAM education in and outside schools, we can largely support youth well-being. And just as an example, our organization has piloted recently, last year actually, a space for arts and well-being in one of the primary schools in Cluj, and this showed a way on how, with not very many resources, culture can be part of the everyday reality of children in school. And also we have recently opened Cube, a STEAM education space for both curricular and extracurricular activities, where we are focusing on the development of life skills of young people. And that means their well-being on the long term is going to be supported, or at least that's our bet on this.
Thank you very much, Rarita, and all three of you. I have to say, as an educator myself, I cannot skip this opportunity to pitch the value of including arts in all levels of education, and also in a boldly multidisciplinary way. When I studied architecture, and I'm not going to tell you when, it was in a technical university. But now I work in a multidisciplinary university here at Aalto University. And this, in our case, this university brings together arts, science, and business. And this already opens eyes in all directions and increases the understanding, importance, and application of arts. So to summarize, I really want to thank you, Rarita, Matthew, and Niels, for sharing with us your insights, knowledge, and experience. Your interventions demonstrate well how powerful the arts can be in contributing to people's well-being. And this means people of all generations. I really like the message of demystifying art that came through in several comments today. I also feel that there is a shift happening in understanding arts in a much broader context in society. And that includes a role in improving people's well-being, improving people's personal growth, improving people's role as individuals in the world, and improving social resilience and justice overall. These are very, very important and meaningful results. Then on a more sort of economical level, I should state that investing in arts is a simple and concrete way to create lasting effects in people's lives and well-being, which can be economically even more sustainable and more inclusive than conventional medical treatments. I believe in having a diversity of ways in which we approach our afflictions, and art should definitely be seen as a tool in improving people's health and improving people's well-being. We have seen today that the European Union is striving for further policy design and development, and that the fruits of arts for health and well-being are multiple, as demonstrated in all the projects that our speakers have been working on. We have also heard today that art is important to cope with global challenges and socio-economic and cultural transformations in our society. For instance, mental and emotional health, the aging population, and dealing with climate change. The future will tell us if social prescribing and culture on prescription for health and well-being will induce positive life changes and become the norm. We know that initiatives in some member states to provide education on well-being at the primary school level have been successful. This has to burgeon to all levels of education, including education at the professional level, to create a skilled workforce. Education also plays a crucial role for the population to learn how they themselves could be creators for art. People will also learn how to improve their well-being by engaging in the arts. So STEAM, which, by the way, means science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. So STEAM education is one of the key enablers where the arts deserve their place. Employment opportunities in arts are on the rise, with 2% of jobs in the future linked to the creativity in Europe and the creative industries. I do wish to thank the entire audience for having participated actively and made your voice heard during this session of great importance for the future of the Europe and the present and future generations, and in particular, the youth in Europe. I still remind you of the Slido panel where you can leave your comments, suggestions, and reflections on our session today. I do hope that this event has expanded your mind and helped you see new dimensions into how art can affect us and our personal and collective well-being. When it comes to art, I would also like to add that even a small thing can be important. Small things matter. And I invite all of us to think, how could we, in a small way, add arts to our own lives? If any of the panelists at this point want to give one piece of advice to our listeners, I'm open to hearing your suggestions. I would like to join a choir. I'll start with that.
If I'm allowed, I would like to take this opportunity to answer one of the questions in the Slido, to say that the Culture and Wellbeing Forum that we are organizing on this year between 26th and the 28th of October can be, more details can be found on the CultureForHealth.eu website.
Okay, thank you, Rarita. So Niels and Matthew, if you were to do one thing, what would it be?
Well, I think if I may, from my side, one thing I definitely continue to do is to advocate for the importance and the power of arts and health within the health sector. I obviously sit within WHO, but it's not a given yet. I think there's still a lot of skepticism. There's still a lot of misunderstanding. And this is really where I see my role most strongly, is to advocate for the potential for arts and health, specifically in the health sector.
Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, I would. I think I would say, think of art as a resource for you. It's once it's collected and once it's made available, it's there for you. And try to find ways that you might, just come across art in your everyday life. Stop by one painting, stop by one sculpture. Take a walk in a part of the city you've never walked in before, and look for art and see if you can find something interesting that happens. Spend about 5 minutes. I think often we can conflate what art is in our culture as something that is maybe very important, but also it tends to minimize the little serendipitous meetings we might have. And I think it's there when you can really find how it might change your life slightly.
Thank you, Matthew. So the art is there for you. It's there for all of us. And with these thoughts and insight and gratitude for everyone's contributions, I also would like to thank the European Union for arranging the European Research and Innovation Days, where we all can come together with these extremely vital topics. Thank you and have a good day.